Welcome back. I'm here in my guest room and today I'm going to be showing you how I created this adorable DIY pleated lampshade using some old fabric and an old thrifted lamp. Best part about this project is you will not need a sewing machine. So if you're into dainty, easy little DIYs like this, I know you're gonna love this project. You'll wanna keep watching. Let's get into it. Some basic materials you'll need will be a lampshade, fabric, a straight edge like a yardstick, hot glue and glue sticks, scissors or a rotary tool or both, and a cutting mat if using a rotary tool. And lastly, an iron. For a full list, please refer to the list in the description. Using a tape measure, you'll wanna start by measuring the height of your lamp. Mine is about 7.5 inches. So I'm going to be cutting my fabric to 8 inches just to give me a little bit of wiggle room. Next, I got to measuring my fabric for cutting. I cut a large strip 8 inches tall, and I will be cutting these into strips of 2 inches. If you have a larger lampshade, widths of 3 inches may look more appropriate for your particular scale. And don't worry if the edges are a little frayed. With our design, they will not show because we're gonna take them to our iron and press a fold of about 1/2 inch over one of the long edges. The folded edge will be the exposed edge, whereas the raw edge will be buried underneath the next piece of fabric. You'll see. I started by gluing the first strip along the seam of the lampshade. This will ensure we're starting with a perfectly vertical piece. Using a thin line of hot glue, I glued the top and the bottom of the strip to the shade. Especially with Empire shades, it can be easy for the strips to get a little wonky as you go because the top of the strip will need to be overlapped a little bit more than the bottom. For the next strips, you'll run another line of hot glue, slightly overlapping the previously placed piece of fabric. For now, we're only going to be gluing the top and leaving the bottom loose so we can adjust the overlap a little bit as needed. And then we'll repeat that process until the entire lampshade is essentially covered. It's going to be difficult to estimate how many strips you'll need. I found working in sets of 10 worked well, so I didn't create too much extra cutting work for myself. So here, I'm just cutting additional pieces of fabric to that 2-inch mark and then taking it over to my iron to press the fold. So here, all my strips are cut and pressed, and next I'll be attaching them to the shade just like the previous strip. I found it helpful to prop the shade up on something. I'm just using a little canister, so I have some clearance between the shade and the table at the bottom. Next, you'll just repeat the previous step, running a line of glue at the top of the shade, slightly overlapping the previous strip of fabric, and then gluing the next strip just to the top. Be sure to pull the strip straight down to keep it as close to perfectly vertical as you can. I found it helpful to give myself a few little guide marks just to avoid things from getting too out of place as you work your way around the lampshade. As you can see, these 10 strips got me about 1/3 of the way around the lampshade. Next, I'll be cutting another 10 strips or so and continuing the process of pressing and folding and then gluing on just to the top. If you've ever worked with a hot glue gun, you probably know the potential of burns. Later in the process, I had a genius idea of using a little chip clip to clip up at the top of the shade to press the fabric into the glue. Don't be like me and burn yourself, just grab a chip clip now. Now we're about 2/3 the way around the shade, and you can see we're doing pretty well keeping things vertical with our guide mark as a reminder. Now I'm just going back and cutting another large piece, 8 inches tall, so I can cut that down into additional 2-inch width strips. And I won't bore you with more ironing footage. For your viewing convenience, I sped this up to 20 times. And you'll just keep going with that same process until you approach the full circumference of the shade, at which time we'll have to make a few adjustments to the process. So here's where things might get a little trickier because it's going to be tough to tuck the next few strips of fabric under the pieces that are already glued. So instead, we're going to cheat a bit and start by lining up the next strip of fabric where you'd like it to overlap and cut a small triangular shape out of the top corner where the next strip of fabric will hit. Then you can shimmy the lower half of the strip under the previous and glue down just the top. For the next strip, we'll repeat the same process. This time the triangle will be cut slightly bigger and at a steeper angle using the first strip as the cutting guide. And wouldn't you know it, I was just one strip short, so I promise this is the last strip cutting and pressing footage you will see today. Before attaching our last strip, you'll want to go back and peel up the first strip where it was glued down at the bottom. This is so we can tuck the last strip underneath the first. We'll use the same trick as before here of cutting a little triangle out of the top corner and gluing down just the top of the piece of fabric for our final and last strip attached to our lampshade. You can see how those triangular cuts really helped everything lay down nice and smooth without too much fabric bulk there at the end. It's already looking so good. To me, in this phase, it looks a little like a car wash or Muppet hair. Now I'm going back and trimming the excess fabric up at the top. We'll be adding a strip of fabric as some trim, and I just want to reduce any fabric bulk. Now that the upper portions of the strips are glued and trimmed, let's move on to gluing the bottom. This part's so much easier than the top because instead of working with each strip individually, we're going to be working in sections. So start with a long ribbon of glue at the bottom rim and then gently press the strips into the line of glue, ensuring you're pulling them straight vertically and overlapping evenly, which you have a little bit of wiggle room to do since we didn't glue the bottoms originally. At this stage, I think she is looking so dang cute. Next, we're gonna trim the bottom fabric just like we did at the top, slowly working your way around the bottom of the shade with your scissors. For the next step, we're going to be creating a trim piece for the top and bottom rim. I used 2-inch strips this time, ensuring each were long enough to cover the entire circumference of the rim. Then, just how we did earlier with the vertical strips, you'll want to press a fold about 1/4 to 1/2 inch. Then we'll use the folded edge as the outside piece of trim and fold the raw edge into the inside of the lampshade. If you're particular about that inner raw edge, you can always press a second fold over the inner surface so the inside has a clean edge as well. If I did this project again, that's probably one thing that I would change. After making my way around the bottom rim, I trimmed the strip just as it met up with the starting position. and secured that with a bead of hot glue. I then went back around and tacked down any loose areas with a little more glue. For the inside raw edge, I went back and trimmed away any excess and secured any loose areas with, you guessed it, more hot glue. Moving on, I'm repeating the same process for the top trim. I'm cutting a 2-inch strip and then taking over to my iron and pressing a fold just like we did before. The smaller the top of your shade, the more difficult this part may be. To get the fabric to lay smoothly, you'll want to consider small notch cuts along the fabric's edge. This will allow the fabric to overlap neatly without creating too many bulky folds. As you wrap the fabric around the shade, these cuts can help it conform to the curve, ensuring a seamless look. And enter the chip clip. As I mentioned before, I wish I would have grabbed this earlier. I probably would have saved some fingerprints along the way. And as you approach the full circumference, you'll cut the trim piece right at the line of the starting edge and secure it with a little bead of hot glue. And that's it, a beautiful custom lampshade that adds so much charm to this already vintage sprinkled bedroom. I love how a small, inexpensive detail can add so much to a room. Let me know down in the comments if you'll try this DIY. I'd love to see how it turns out. And if you enjoy projects that make your home feel more like you without the hefty price tag, be sure to subscribe because I have plenty more. And I'll see you guys next time.